Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of the Sensibility Newsletters podcast. My guest today is Seth Dellinger. Welcome, Seth.
Hey Joe, great to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. So, me and Seth have actually worked together as part of the FGNA's communications team for the last couple of years. And Seth has recently kind of moved on from that work. So, personally, I'm really happy that I get to do an interview with Seth as a kind of, a pleasant exit from that work that we did together. So, really nice to spend this time with you, and I look forward to our discussion. In terms of what we're talking about today, the newsletter itself this month is focused on success stories. And Seth has a very interesting personal journey with the Feldenkrais method and into the work that he's doing currently. But he's also, for a number of years, worked with clients professionally, and has some stories to share with us that, give some idea of the kind of success that people can find through a modality like the Feldenkrais method. So with that in mind, what I'd really like to do initially is just maybe collectively define this idea of success story, or success in specifically, because as we talk about this subject, people will have various ideas of success. And I think that it's good that we are, to some extent, on the same page with what we mean when we're talking about success. And I think that Seth, you will have some interesting ideas on this subject. So I'm going to turn it over to you on that initial topic.
Yeah, well, thanks again for this invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's been a pleasure working with you, Joe. And I can't think of a better thing for us to do than to get out the word about the Feldenkrais method. Although I've moved on, I'm glad that you're still doing this week after week, month after month. And, when I first found the Feldenkrais method, I didn't feel like a success in life at all. I was kind of a lost soul. And one of the things that really attracted me in the beginning was, of course, the practice, but also right from the beginning, I was reading some of the books of Moshe Feldenkrais. And some of the things that he would say were things like, what happened, just one little more preliminary, is when I didn't know what to do, the one idea I had was maybe I could get more healthy, right? So I started running and things like that. But then Feldenkrais defined health at one point as the capacity to live your unavowed dreams. He also defined health at another point as if you fall down, it's the capacity to get back up and continue. So right from the beginning, I was understanding, okay, this is different, than a lot of the perspectives that I've been, excuse me, that I've encountered just through my education and through living in this society. And he also speaks about finding your own handwriting. And as you get into the practice, if you go to a class and the process we call awareness through movement, or if you work with an individual practitioner who does the hands-on work and is focused, just on what you need as opposed to what happens in the group setting, what we're really up to, even though Feldenkrais understood some universal principles of kind of what all human beings need to feel healthy, his interest was really to help us to find what is my unique feeling that I enjoy. What's it like for me to enjoy being myself? And how is that expressed through movement? But it's also how I think about myself. It's the kind of situations that I'm willing to put myself into. And, we can see this. There was even a talk he gave once where I remember he celebrated people he had worked with who had severe physical disabilities. And he pointed to them as being some of the most potent people that he knew because they had nonetheless lived these full lives. So in a sense, success really depends on each individual. But I think that Feldenkrais really opens that door to say, there are things that we can all work on because we're all humans. And so this is likely to come up for each one of us. And a lot of those things, you know, are directly in the body, like the quality of my breathing. But then there's an individual aspect for each one of us. Like, man, I'm chasing something. What is it? Oh, I just did something that makes me feel like I'm actually moving closer to that thing that particularly resonates for me. And so that's kind of how I would, you know, drawing on the ideas of Feldenkrais, how I would begin a conversation about success.
So, I mean, you kind of triggered a memory of listening to one of Moshe's lessons for me, where he's describing a movement and saying that he wants people to do it to their own sense of what it feels like for them. He doesn't want them to do it in the way, I'm not describing this well. I should have got this particular bit like in my head before, but it's something along the lines of like doing it to your own standard rather than the teacher's. So even though he's given the instruction, he
Right.
doesn't want you to, use the model that he's providing. He's like, I'm giving this instruction to you, and I want you to do it to your own sense of satisfaction, your own sense of enjoyment. And I think that, for me, that really like you said in there, I want to enjoy being myself. I think that is a very strong statement and something that I think a lot of people don't even realize as actually possible, you know, so I think that there's something, a direction within the Feldenkrais method that really allows people to start to feel their own sense of this is my sense of standards, or the feelings that I'm looking for to allow me to feel like I can enjoy being myself. And I think that it's a continuous work in progress, because we've got life history, and we come into, there's lots of things that affect us during life, right? So getting to that sensation of I enjoy being myself, maybe I didn't yesterday or I don't right now, but I can still aim in that direction. So
Absolutely. And, you know, a lot of people will discover the Feldenkrais method because, let's say, they have severe neck pain and they've tried everything and it doesn't help. Or, they went through an accident and they're trying to recover mobility and capacity so they can get back to work, or those kinds of, really concrete physical challenges that we face as embodied beings that need to literally move through the world. But something that isn't always addressed by, first of all, there's many wonderful modalities out there in addition to Feldenkrais. So I wouldn't say that Feldenkrais is by any means the only one that can help a person through this process. But I do think that one of the strengths of Feldenkrais is that he was very explicit that if I have neck pain, I might also have a thought that I am sort of defective, right? And so there's certainly biomechanical things and, like healing of tissue and all kinds of just stuff we could describe that way that needs to happen for that neck pain, maybe for me to be able to move through it.
yeah,
But part of it is, along the way, I'm going to have to face, I can't turn my head to the side. It just hurts. And that's maybe going to be true all of this week. And
yeah,
how am I going to get through the week? Maybe next week it turns a few degrees more without pain, but it's, so how do I deal with the frustration and the need to have patience on a level that I've never had? Maybe I'm already a high achiever and I'm used to doing things and executing and accomplishing things and, leading other people on a team or something like this. And then suddenly, oh, I'm injured. It can be devastating.
yeah,
And I think Feldenkrais really understood there's a deep psychological piece of this, and he brilliantly wove that into the way he taught. And one of the things he said to some of the first people who studied to go on to teach it, to do what you and I do, is he said, what we're really teaching here is how to learn. So what you find out at a certain point is there's not really teachers and students, it's just people learning how to learn and other people who are facilitating learning how to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. On the previous point, you kind of pointed towards I don't know how to say it, the process of this particular issue in me being something that is restricting my sense of the enjoy. Let's go back to that statement. My sense of the enjoyment of myself. So let's say it's neck pain, but I think inherent in that process is that the idea or the activities that I'm doing with myself in the way that I'm carrying myself in this particular moment, with reference to the psychological state of myself, are in some way influencing the pain and I don't know, creating a situation where that pain arises. So in working with, as you said, Feldenkrais as a physical practice, when you're working with the body, you still need to kind of like go back to this sense of self-reference, and maybe in that process, there's an adjustment that needs to happen where you develop a new relationship with yourself, or something has to change in the way that you're behaving, or the way that you physically move, or the way that you act, that would take you in a direction where you're no longer in pain, but also would give you more of a sense of the quality of being myself would change, and would that and not be creating that painful experience in some way. And I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it seemed like an addition to what you were talking about.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're saying it the way it's coming to you in the moment, right? Which is part of our practice.
Yeah.
Feldenkrais is very quotable, though. So another line from him that comes to mind is he said, I'm not so much after flexible bodies, I'm after flexible minds. And I'm wanting to help restore people to their human dignity. And what's really interesting in my case is I actually didn't come to the method because of neck pain or something. I have had some physical issues that I've worked through and definitely gained a lot more capacity and physical comfort through the method, but it wasn't really what brought me in. As I mentioned, I kind of felt like a lost soul. I was in a marriage that was going to end in divorce that actually happened during my Feldenkrais training. So the training was a pretty bittersweet thing because, all of this stuff was opening up for me, but I was dealing with a kind of excruciating experience in terms of, and I'm also a father, and those were areas that I didn't feel successful, And so this has been a big piece for me of the method all along. And, there have been times where the physical practice has been more in the foreground, but a lot of what we're talking about here, which, for anyone listening, you can really dive deep if you go ahead, and it can be challenging, but if you read some of Feldenkrais's books, The Potent Self is the first one that I read, which is maybe not an easy starting place. Maybe Awareness Through Movement is a better one. And
I also started with the potent self. So.
Yeah. I like to recommend Awareness Through Movement is one of the books to start with. And I actually, because I think people should hear it, I read it aloud on YouTube. The second section of that book has the actual movement lessons, but the whole beginnings is a really beautiful explanation of how the method is also really part of the journey of an individual in society. And, people have heard this phrase about, beliefs. What's the phrase? They say beliefs. There's some phrase that it's not popping in my head, but the beliefs that don't serve you, and you have to get past those beliefs. But what I also learned through Feldenkrais is the things I believe, they literally shape my embodiment. So if I believe that there's a right way to move, and I'm here in class because I don't move the right way, and I need to listen to the teacher who knows the right way, and therefore they're kind of a better person than me, and all of that is this belief that I think beyond the movement learning, that's one of the things that Feldenkrais is trying to liberate us from.
Mm.
So, and there's different stages to this, but what I eventually, you know, began to teach as I went out in the world, and it took me some time to really clarify this, but is I really try to teach the learning process itself.
Mm.
So I mentioned I was divorced during the training. Then I started teaching publicly, actually, before I finished my training. And it was super exciting and it was so fun to share this work. But actually, I had no idea about being an entrepreneur, about putting myself out there. And I was still dealing with a lot of this stuff of like, am I good enough? Like, who am I to teach someone else how to do something? Like, there's still a bit of that mindset of actually the teacher is supposed to know more, even as I'm trying to, come into this sense of, no, what I need is just to find out what I need. So, I had some ups and downs, but some really exciting experiences. And then we all had this experience of COVID, right? That just hit. And it's interesting. I mean, be easy to talk about all of the horrors of that time period, but it was also just this pause. The world just paused and got quiet. And like many teachers of all kinds of movement modalities, as a Feldenkrais practitioner, it suddenly meant, oh, I can't teach in person. I have to start developing online programs and, figure out how to work individually with clients that I can't touch. So the social isolation really was interesting because there was a part of me, I had a kind of awkwardness in relating to other people. So there was something comforting about, oh, okay, I just get to stay at home. But then again, we were all so lonely. And so how do I reach out? And this is a point in time where I started exploring, some other modalities. I joined different groups online that were engaged in various kinds of dialogue practices. Mm-hmm. And I also just really kind of went deeper into a meditation practice that I have. These days I sit for an hour every morning. Mm-hmm. But what I kept noticing, even as I went out and studied other things, was, wow, this learning process from Feldenkrais, it seems to apply everywhere. It doesn't have to be a movement thing. It really is a learning thing. Yeah. And so, anyway, that's been one of the most exciting things to me, and what I try to bring to my clients and in the programs that I've put together is to really understand we are learning how to learn in this practice. And then whatever we learn by practicing awareness through movement, by working with a practitioner, doing functional integration, movement is almost a metaphor for how we can approach other kinds of stuckness, in our lives.
Yeah. I mean, if I just one of the initial points that you made, or one of the quotes you made, was to do with getting back up from falling down. Right. And I think the physical aspect of the practice is very connected with this particular part, where it's let's say if in the course of my day or the course of my week, I get knocked off from this place of enjoying being myself, I've got this thing that I can go back to and do a process that helps me be able to get back. And personally, I found that a massive influence on me when I was starting with this method, I felt personally that the Feldenkrais method was the only thing that was giving me that sense of internal correction. Not correct as in right or wrong, but realignment or repositioning or whatever. And coming out of the lesson, I'd feel like, okay, I feel I can approach life again, and without that process of sort of I don't know, realigning a compass or something, I didn't necessarily have the tools at that point in my life to do that by myself. So it was a huge resource. So in terms of the kind of the you mentioned the sort of the meta learning level, but in some way the physical aspect for me was realigning me to that bigger meta idea. It's just doing an hour's lesson would provide that and then I could be like, okay, I can reapproach life in a way that's more aligned with some of these Feldenkrais ideas. So
Right.
I think that the physical stuff is really like fundamental to it, but it isn't the end result, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and at the same time, for sure, I think that one of the magical things about the Feldenkrais method is that it is enacted through the body. It is movement. I mean, as I understood his story, Feldenkrais is reading Freud. Feldenkrais is thinking about all kinds of things, but eventually he decides movement is the best vehicle. Because if we do talk therapy, you tell me your story, but then it's still a question of is that really the story? Is that your interpretation? But as soon as I work with a client and I watch them move, I can see what's easy, what's not. And then if we can improve that movement, and this is the other thing that Feldenkrais understood, we're going to improve this person's sense of self. And I think that's what you're describing as well. And what I'd just like to highlight is in your story that you just told, there's that moment before you decide to return to the practice. There's that moment of realizing, wow, whatever it is, I'm going through my work week, I have a stressful conversation, I'm not feeling resourced. And there's a moment of, and this is for me, I define this learning process now as 4 postures. The first one would be kindness. And so you say to yourself, I've been kind of ignoring something that is now talking to me, and I'm going to listen to my body, and I'm going to take the time to resource my body. And for people who are aware, that a lot of people talk about the inner critic, right? Oh, I have an inner critic. I have this inner voice. Something that people might do is, well, I'm going to begin to say affirmations. I'm going to begin to, really concentrate on loving myself. And totally crucial, right? But I could say all the affirmations in the world, and then I could tell myself a story like, because I love myself, I'm going to go to the gym. And because I love myself, I'm going to do, 100 reps of this thing to get stronger. And I'm ignoring my body. Maybe I'm actually only capable of 50 reps of this exercise right now. And yet, so I have this idea of self-love, but I'm not including my body in it. And I think that's the brilliant thing when you do awareness through movement, and the practitioner invites you to do the very first movement, then one of the next things you probably hear is, maybe do it a little slower, maybe rest a little more, maybe don't worry about what it looks like. And all of that is a kind of kindness towards myself, but it's not on the level of the words or saying the right thing or believing something. It's really enacting kindness.
Yeah. Just on that point, like the skills that you learn practicing the Feldenkrais method, like slowing down, like listening to yourself, like sensing your breathing, I don't think those things are well established as ways for us to kind of check in with our own sense of self as we're growing up, or as we're going through difficult processes in life. So in some way, like, you could say to someone, self-care is really important. It's a great idea. It's something that we should all think about. But the how of self-care is, maybe like you say, like affirmations, or, people like have like go to a spa day or something. But what the Feldenkrais method does is it provides some very kind of like simple things to track in yourself, that if you practice them and you allow yourself to slow down, you end up at self-care, very naturally.
I started at a certain point using the phrase soul care, just because it kind of broadens the scope. But, self-care is not a habit of our culture at this point. And we were referring to the potent self before. And this made a huge impression on me, because the first book of his that I read, he describes in child development how, and as so many of the awareness through movement lessons are built on developmental movements from the first year of life. But he'll talk about, he sort of draws this picture of a child who, is just doing what children do. They're playing, basically. But then they make discoveries and the child sits up. And then the parents go, oh my God, the child sat up. And then maybe one of the parents calls the other one over and then they try to get the baby to do it again, do it again. And he explains the baby starts to understand there's a connection between what I'm able to do and the emotional response I'm getting from my parents. And this is one of the very earliest places where we begin to perform, right? To not do, and if you just leave the baby alone, it sits up, it might do that once, and it might be another month or two before it does it again, because it has no idea how it did it. It wasn't trying to sit up. And the Feldenkrais process can allow us to actually, in a funny way, kind of stumble into new, experiences like that. Maybe it'd be good just to sort of flesh that. So I said there's 4 postures, the way I think of it. So that first one, kindness. The second one is connection, or we could also use the words presence, attention. So of course, awareness through movement isn't just about movement. It's arguably even more about paying attention to how we move. And, if I just roll from my back to the left side and come back and I do it 10 times, there's at least 10 things that I can discover about how I roll to the left side. And if I just kept going, there's almost a limitless number of things that I could find out. And each little detail gives me a new opportunity to, let me try that differently or that differently. Oh, I did it when I was breathing in. I did it when I was breathing out. I held my breath, or, I liked it better when I rolled to the right. What am I doing differently on the right? And what I'm saying now is the third posture. That's curiosity. We just start opening to, there's so many possibilities here. We're still not trying to nail down a specific goal. But for anyone who's tried awareness through movement, if you're listening, you'll recognize it can feel magical how the improvements happen as we do the Feldenkrais process. But it does really shift, just by listening, just by paying attention. And I like to say the body has the experience of being listened to. Like, people describe, I grew up in a household with, 10 siblings and no one ever listened to me. And then someone, sits down and really listens to their story. They go, wow, I felt seen. I felt heard. I feel like our bodies get to finally be seen and heard by us in this setting. And then for me, the final posture, all of these postures are, hopefully people understand, not physical positions, but kind of like ways of being in the world. The final posture for me is play, right? And something that Feldenkrais often did was say, do it badly, or, as soon as you've figured out what your habit is, okay, now let's deliberately do the thing that's not your habit, but let's not assume that, it's going to be any good. Let's just do it just for fun. And we can get into this light place where, I think he has another quote that I won't remember exactly, but it's something like, learning is the most powerful when we could at any moment break into a smile or laugh at a funny joke that someone might tell. That's when we know that we're really kind of in the pocket with our learning.
So, and I think I'm understanding what you're saying. So if I just sort of kind of bounce it back at you, what I think you're saying is that the way that you're explaining the process that you take people through to help them find whatever this version of success that we're talking about, which is, feeling more self-fulfillment or, being happy in themselves, that part of that process is going through or relearning, re-engaging in a learning process where they learn how to be themselves again,
Right.
and learn how to be themselves in a way that feels more authentic to them, or, with where they're at in their life in that moment, it feels good for them again. And the steps that you're pointing out are, or the pillars are the kind of the markers for helping people that don't have those things in place and don't have that sense of feeling connected with themselves or feeling good in themselves, the markers that they can keep track of or pay attention to that help them in their own learning process with that. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, I recently offered a workshop called Creative Alchemy. And
Mhm.
the basic idea was, if you feel stuck, your stuckness isn't going to be different. It's going to be totally different than my stuckness or his or her stuckness. But at any moment, and, we did this in an embodied way, but do I need to be a little more kind to myself? Is that what I'm failing to do right now? Oh, do I need to actually pay a little more attention? Oh, could I be a little more open to the possibilities? Am I a little, am I have a judgment that's closing things down?
Yeah.
Could I just be more playful right now? Could I actually, rather than, dipping my toes in the water, could I just dive in and find out, like what is this like by truly participating? And all of that can happen in movement, but it can happen in my emotional life.
Mm.
Maybe I'm angry, but do I have permission to be angry? Does it make sense given the circumstance I just went through that I'd be angry? Well, maybe I can be kind to myself and allow that anger is, it just doesn't mean I want to blow up. And in fact, okay, so what am I going to do now? Let me pay attention to the situation so that I can clarify, the proper response and not just,
Yeah.
and then as it unfolds, maybe I get curious. Like, are there other situations just like this where I get, oh, I noticed someone else didn't get so angry when a similar thing happened. Why is it for me? And like,
Yeah.
actually, anger, if I know what I'm doing, I can play with that feeling. Because play, another thing I'd say about play is it always respects the well-being of everyone who's playing the game. There's a version that we all know of play, which is like sports, like winning and losing.
Mm.
There's a beautiful book that people could look for called Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he says
No.
the infinite game is the game that you play for the joy of continuing the game. And
Mhm.
that's kind of what I think about there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, let me drop one other thing in just because I think this is really crucial. And again, we sort of touched on it already with like you decide to come back to the practice. It's time for awareness through movement. But even that recognition, right, is more broadly going on in the course of your busy day where maybe you have other things to do. Do I actually have an hour
Yeah.
to do an awareness through movement lesson? Could I do half of a awareness through movement lesson? Maybe just spend 30 minutes and that still does something for me. And so this is what I would call anytime, anywhere awareness. So that I don't have this beautiful experience with the practitioner in the classroom or, in the private session, but then I don't take it with me.
Mm.
So this is a big thing I also emphasize, and I created a process I call the presence mantra, which I could show people if any listeners are curious. I can provide a link where they can get a little free workbook that explains it. But it's a process for basically taking this approach to learning and awareness into any situation at all. I'm driving in traffic, I'm at the store, I'm having a difficult conversation. So yeah, that's just one more thing because I think Feldenkrais was really clear on this point too. He said something like, take that thing you do well in life and then see if you can generalize it into all the other parts of your life. Easier said than done, of course, but I think that's his idea of what he's doing as he does something that on the surface looks like teaching movement. He's showing a process for how we can get past those obstacles, which are often internal obstacles, to do other things.
There's a kind of a really good analogy of that in terms of movement and the body. So within an ATM lesson, awareness through movement lesson, you might be doing a specific movement. Let's say it's a shoulder movement,
Right.
and you're enacting all of the muscles around that particular part of yourself, right? Let's say it's like your upper arm or your forearm or whatever, the muscles that are kind of local to it. And there's a sense that actually what you do, if you start to spread the sense of effort throughout your entire muscular system, is that you make it a lot easier on that localized place. So if all of you is involved in a movement, you're putting less physical pressure, specifically physical pressure, on that localized place, and the movement starts to feel easier. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is that, we may have an area or a localized area in our life that um, we're focused on and maybe we're good at, but if we spread the effort, throughout the whole of our life, the whole process can start to feel easier and more comfortable, you know, regardless of what we're doing. So I don't know if that's a useful analogy, but
Oh, it's great. I mean, one of the, in fact, the examples I often use, anyone who's listening could try this if you're sitting or standing, but you pretend you're back in grade school, right? And they ask for, who's got the answer, and you raise your hand. But maybe, like you said, maybe I have some pain, oh, what, I don't like, what's going on there. Now, what I might not notice, and I'm actually shifting my position here, is did I raise my hand like this, or did I raise my hand like this?
Mhm.
And hopefully you can see it, but where was my weight? So if I lean to the right, support myself mainly with my right leg or the right sit bone in a chair, and I'm lifting my left hand, there's no support under this arm. Like the rest of me isn't there holding up the arm as the arm tries to hold itself up. Versus if I come over here, it's a world of difference. And yet that's a detail that many of us never even look for.
Yeah.
So, maybe if there's some issue in a relationship, and I'm totally focused on why I think there's a problem. In fact, often I'm pretty sure it's the other person. They're not acting the way they're supposed to. And so, I'm sure there's nothing for me to look at.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good analogy.
Mhm.
If you want, I could tell you about, some of the other stories, because I
Please,
feel like
yeah, please do.
I
Yeah,
story
yeah,
quite a
go for
bit.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so just a few come to mind. So one is, and I've changed all these names just, but similar to the name of the person. So I worked with a woman I'll call Martina. She's a long-term client. And she is a retired scientist. She's very active. She's in her 70s. She has one of those, Fitbits, and she walks 10,000 steps a day.
Hmm.
She loves learning, which is why it's so great to work with her. But, she's been through a lot. She's had multiple injuries, broken her pelvis, she's broken her ankle. Since we've been working together recently, she broke her wrist. And, but she just figured out at a certain point, wow, I love this process. And she really is so fun to work with because she always comes in, what are we going to do? Sometimes she comes in, I say, how are you doing today? She's like, I feel great. But she doesn't have the attitude like, well, I don't want to do a session. She's like, no, I want to do more. Mm-hmm. And also love that, she's for many years worked with horses in a program where special needs kids would come out to meet the horses, and she would sort of guide the kids to work with the horses. She has been a volunteer around voter registration. She's even done correspondence with prisoners. So she has this real desire to do something positive in the world. And, so I could tell a lot of stories about her, but I just kind of wanted to point to, she gets absolutely the most she could get out of it, because she's sort of already digested through many years this attitude of really loving learning. She travels, and what she always talks about at the end of the session, she goes, oh, I know it's working. I've got the Feldenkrais tingles. So she's always fun to work with. Another person, I'll call her Caitlin, has been part of my online program, which is called Grounded Connection. And is a program that, it includes the movement work and combines other things. Sometimes I call it somatic inquiry. And we do meditation. We have dialogue practices between us on the calls where, again, I won't go into a long discussion about dialogue, but what I can tell you is if I'm having a conversation, I can also try to accomplish something in the conversation, and I can try too hard to impress the other person. So the same ideas from Feldenkrais really can show up here.
Yeah.
But Caitlin is someone who's had chronic pain all of her life. She had muscular disorder since she was very young. In recent years, she was able to triumph in sleeping 12 hours a night instead of 16 hours a night, right? All kinds of brain fog. Her life is filled with, doctor's appointments all the time. And, but she really took this on. We've been working together for a couple of years. The inner critic was big for her. Yeah. She really worked through that. She learned how to slow down and rediscover her body. And one of the things that just made me so happy was there's a practice called contact improvisation, which I've been part of. It sounds like you know it. Maybe some listeners don't. And again, this is another thing you can find videos on YouTube and whatnot. But it's a form of dancing that's very free form, and people will lean on each other. They will use each other's bodies as support. Now, if you think about someone who's had chronic pain their whole life, going into a situation like that. But she saw a conversation I did with a friend of mine, as well as a cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke, where we were talking about how this practice of contact improvisation can be transformative in so many ways. And in fact, I often think of contact improvisation as like partner Feldenkrais, because it's this listening we're both doing and we're both doing. But she took it up. And what to me is so cool is like, she had to think a new thought before she went and did that, because I can only imagine, that's like the last thing she would have done in the past. She also told me recently that she feels like she's finally putting an end to years and years of road rage in her driving. And the thing that makes me most happy is she just says, I love my life, And the way I would translate that, just to sort of like put a pin on it, is, we all know the world is crazy right now, but I think if you can fall in love with learning, then you really can fall in love with life. Because if you can come to that place of being kind to yourself, then even a challenge is kind of an adventure. It's kind of an opportunity, right? And if we know how to manage that, so those are a couple of my favorite stories.
What I like about that, I mean, the sense that I get from both of them is the sense that both of those individuals came at it from a very different place, but the process they went through was very much about like self-discovery. It wasn't to do with learning better movement or learning to think better. It was just like, what is it in me that is missing, and how do I want to feel in my life, and so that I feel fulfilled and, live well, So like coming to see you for the First Lady and getting lessons, which is to some extent like an input into the nervous system, right? It's like, here's some new information for you. She sounds like she loves that process, like that's food for her, and I don't know what age she is, but it does. I think that I would aspire to be someone that has gone through those kind of physical injuries or, and to still have that curiosity and sense of engagement in life where I want to learn and I want to explore. I think that's a lovely story. And please go ahead. Well, exactly. And then the second lady, obviously, what you described to me is I can completely resonate with that experiencing chronic pain and then going into something like contact improv, there's a whole bunch of trust involved in that process, right? What if what if it takes me back a step? To be able to go into that, it really shows a degree of shift out of something, fear-based process into something different, which I think is lovely.
When we practice awareness through movement, we talk about how much do you move and how much do you rest. And, in the case of Kaylin, she is having to think about, when am I going to sleep tonight? How many days do I need to give myself to recuperate from a particular activity? But she learned how to manage that in such a way that she feels herself getting better over time. And there are those challenges. There are those moments, where, wow, that was a lot, and I'm I'm kind of drained right now and I just need to
Oh,
rest.
yeah.
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 One of the first people who took the Grounded Connection program, who I like to highlight as well, is a woman named Amanda.
Hmm.
And she was an Episcopal priest,
Okay.
so community leader, and had been really, I mean, it was clear already when I first met her, she's just really loved by her community and does so much. But she also had a very strong inner critic. She described herself as, overachiever throughout school and like, it's never good enough. I have to accomplish one more thing. She had been through divorce, and she had some adult children who were going through challenges that she was trying to support. So she had a lot of questions around physical comfort, which the movement work helped, but she really loved also the meditation, looking at her inner voice, interacting with others. And she told me that one of the biggest things for her, she says, when I'm in the office with, people in my parish, I'm practicing the same thing that we've been doing in the dialogue practices. We call it holding space. And the way I teach it is, if someone else has got a lot of difficulty and I'm going to actually sit here and listen to them, I actually have to, if I have internally some difficulty going on, I have to be able to hold space internally for myself and then turn outwards to help the other. Yeah. And she, really celebrated that. And I was so happy when she finished the program. She said, I'm going to take a sabbatical. And she had, in 10 years of service, she had never given herself that time.
Yeah.
So that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I can imagine that, I mean, my mum does something not exactly the same, but throughout her life, she's been someone that is often giving to other people. And I think part of that process, if you're someone like that, is
Right.
actually that you need to give yourself time and attention as well,
Right.
and there's a
Right.
balance to be found there. That's great. I don't know if you have any more.
I got one more for you if you want to
Yeah,
hear.
go for it. Yeah.
So this is a younger fellow named Alan, working in a tech job. And this is someone that I worked with entirely online. He self-diagnosed as having ADHD. I think there's a lot of people like this, so no one ever told him, but he just feels like attention is a huge challenge for him.
Yeah.
There were questions around, substance use for him, and he was going through a lot of grief from having lost both of his parents. And he was also the oldest sibling, so he felt like, but I'm supposed to be the one, for my other siblings. He had a lot of stress in his job, and also challenges with his partner, who he clearly is crazy in love with, but then there was all kinds of conflict that would come up. So in fact, with him, the presence mantra was one of the key practices over and over. That's why he contacted me originally, because he just found some resources I had for the presence mantra before we even talked.
Yeah.
But eventually, over the course of a year and a half, I just felt like I was accompanying him. Just like Caitlin, I wasn't there when she decided I'm going to try contact improvisation. He did all kinds of stuff on his own. Yeah. But it was just, I watched him actually get married, transition out of his job and become, actually sounds like get better pay, because he became a consultant, because he still had all that expertise, but no longer had to deal with the office politics, which had been really challenging for him. And pretty soon he's going to be a father. And so
Right.
It's just like, even all of that seemed to turn out pretty well, but there was just so many moments of anxiety and confusion along the way. And I think, Feldenkrais, this model, which obviously I keep pointing to the broader learning model, but I just think it serves in so many ways. And, I guess if someone's wondering, how do you pull this all together? Just another Feldenkrais quote comes to mind, right? He would say, if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want. So I think that would be my one piece of advice to someone listening who's just approaching the Feldenkrais method is, don't just look at it as, this cool modality you've heard about and maybe this will solve the problems. It's like, what would life be like if it could be absolutely, that dream you've always had of how you'd like to live? And knowing what that is and working with a practitioner, you can really look at what are the things that are in between me and that life that I want to live, and it can become, if physical pain is involved, that's a very good and a practical place to start. But this is, just the beginning, I think, of what this learning can be.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to your point that you've described the Feldenkrais method as a wisdom practice, I
Yeah,
think that the wisdom contained in it lends itself very well to helping people achieve their own sense of success. You know, I think it provides all the resources that the person needs, or it provides a good set of resources that the person needs to learn how to manage themselves better, to look after themselves better, and to act um, in a way that is fulfilling to them, whether that's physically or, as you've kind of pointed, the broader context of different life situations as well. So yeah, it's really I'm glad that you've pointed to all of those different things because I think it gives people a sense that success is different for everyone.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
there's not something that this is success. It's like everyone's version of success is their own or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess just one last point that I think is really worth adding in here, and it's something that I'm turning to more,
Hmm.
is the question of leadership.
Hmm.
Again, we know that leadership is a vital question in our world right now. And I think that all of these qualities that we've been talking about mainly in the context of an individual, but if you can embody these qualities and you can even begin to see how these qualities live at least as potential in another person, this is where I think the kind of leadership that, in my view, we need, which is not like authority over another person, but really how do we have leadership that allows those that you know the people who are following the leader are not feeling that I am following what someone else is telling me what to do. So that
Mm.
I think the way Feldenkrais offered his teaching is a model of leadership in a sense.
Sure. Yeah.
And some people might have aspirations to leadership in a company or in their community, but to be a parent is
Yeah.
leadership.
Yeah.
And if you've been fighting the inner critic, which obviously I had that fight for a long time, and there are certainly days where I still feel that I have to really confront that. It's just a matter of, am I going to take leadership in my own life?
Mm.
And I think that's possible, and really, I think it's what the world is asking of all of us at this point. So,
Mm.
uh, yeah, I just can't emphasize enough how important I think this method is. In my mind, it should be known by 100 times more people than it currently is. But
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're here promoting it.
Yeah.
In your work, and it was such a pleasure to do that side by side with you, and then
Yeah.
to
Same.
sort of
Yeah. And I'm really glad that we've got to share some, because I feel like we could continue this conversation for another 2 hours and explore some of these subjects in depth,
right.
but it's nice to hear a little about your life and your journey and the work that you're doing right now. And I hope people, get in contact with you and, work with you in different ways because you can tell by this conversation Seth has a lot to offer and a lot of wisdom to share. So I'm really pleased to give you the platform in this way. So, um,
Well,
pleasure.
thanks so much.
Yeah,
And again, I'll provide a resource for the presence mantra. And yeah, lastly, thanks, Joe, to you for your leadership, and really getting this method out into the world. Beautiful to be with you.
great. Yeah, thanks, Seth. I appreciate you.